What's going on, guys? Phil here. Wanted to bring you a video today to mostly benefit me, to be totally honest, but I think that there's not a lot of super great resources available online that talk about, this kind of subject that I'm going to be going into. So anything that gets put out there for people to find if they're trying to do the same thing is beneficial. So for those who are unaware, I am a semi-professional card game player. I played Hearthstone competitively for about 4 years. I still, play Hearthstone. I've recently gotten into Magic the Gathering, trying to qualify for the Mythic Invitational, so that's fairly new. I'd give myself, 6 months into that. And I've also experimented with Dragon Ball Super, which is a lesser known card game out in the West, but that's pretty new. That's like a 2-year-old game. I've only been playing it for about 6 months as well. But I am into card games. Card games are my jam, my jelly, my everything. So with that, there's a lot of different mechanics and game design things that you realize if you play the same genre for as long as I have, and there's a lot of things that are are standard amongst games, but there's also always room for tons of innovation. And with all that being said, I am currently going to college for a degree in computer science to then go into game design. My first major project that I'm beginning is to try and make my own card game, and I'm a little bit ways off of it so far. We're in the very early stages of producing the very basic ideas, trying to get some of the mechanics down, stuff like that, and we are very bare bones right now. But I wanted to put out there my ideas for the game I'm designing, talk a little bit about why I'm making choices that I am, and explain those in a easily digestible format, so that if I was to have to explain my ideas to somebody else, I could just link to this video, or if I need to ever go back and rehear my own ideas, because sometimes things you think of and they kind of get lost as you continue through trying to flesh out other ideas. You kind of forget things, so having everything just down seems very beneficial to me. There's also not a ton of resources online aside from some GDC talks about the very basic introduction to starting to get into designing your own game. There's a lot of stuff once you have a basis, or if you already are semi into the game design space. But I have zero experience in game design. I have almost no experience in coding, anything like that. I'm just basically putting ideas onto paper and then putting my paper onto this video. But I do eventually hope to, be able to make my game a reality, and I want to give all my ideas to anyone else who might find interest in this. So, first things first, I have very, very well done, I think, hand-drawn little cards that are going to try and explain the idea and the basics of my game. So let's get rid of this little, that's not the right button. Let's get rid of this little background text, and we'll pop up this. So, as you can tell, bare bones, basically my idea for a card game is to take a lot of elements from card games which I've enjoyed that I think are kind of their best elements, and be able to put underlying mechanics that then make my game more unique. I do think that there's a lot of different ways to do very basic things. The very first thing that I had to think of when I was trying to come up with my card game was, how does mana work? Mana or resources or land, or however you want to call it, there are hundreds of thousands of card games, and there are millions of unique ways that you could try to implement a mana system. There's 3 different methods that I've kind of honed into as the staples. There's the Hearthstone method, or a modified Hearthstone method, that being that every turn you get 1 mana. There might be cards that give you extra mana, but every turn up till a cap, you gain 1 additional mana, and all your mana refreshes every turn. That's, if you've ever played Hearthstone or seen Hearthstone, that's how it works. Turn 1, you have 1 mana. Turn 2, you have 2 mana. Maybe, long time ago, you played Wild Growth on turn 2 as a druid, and that means turn 3, you would actually have 4 mana. But that's kind of that method. Stemming from that, there's also the modified Hearthstone method, which is something that, what's the name of it? There's a guy in the Hearthstone community who makes, arena tier lists, who made his own card game. It's based entirely in, Ethereum as one of the, as, the currency to how you buy cards and stuff like that. So I think it's in very early beta. I have no experience with that game, but by looking through some of their design decisions and, resources that they have available on their website, they have a modified Hearthstone method where from turns 1 till, 6, you gain 1 mana each turn, but then your 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th mana crystal are locked behind gates, and those gates open up after a certain other amount of turns. So turn 1 you get a mana all the way to turn 6. Turn 6 going into turn 7, instead of getting that 7th mana crystal, you get 1 proc of a gate, and then for the 7th mana crystal you need 2 gates. So you basically gain half a mana that you actually can't use, and then on turn 7 you would get the second part. You would then unlock your 7th mana crystal on turn 8. So trying to give that linear curve, but also throw some wrenches in the mix, is what I consider the modified Hearthstone method of mana. And I think that lends itself really well to digital card games. In a world where you're trying to be both digital or physical, or in a world where you're trying to make your digital card game feel more like a physical card game, I don't think that a linear mana system is the way to go, and I instead am going to opt for a different method. But the Hearthstone method has shown to be very interesting and very accessible, which is definitely one of the major pros to it. Being accessible, and then it's very easy to implement into a digital card game as opposed to a physical card game. The next major mana system, which I've kind of pinned on, is the Magic the Gathering land system. Basically, you have to put resource cards into your deck, which then act as your mana source. So there's lots of different ways that games have gone about this, because of course there's a lot of card games, but the fact that you can get mana screwed or mana flooded is a feeling that I really dislike. I think that if Magic had some other way that was similar to the way they do it, but you couldn't get so drastically skewed in one direction of either getting all mana or no mana, then Magic would be almost the perfect card game. But it's been a card game for 20 something years. Its base mana system seems very primitive now, and still there's a lot of depth that you can get out of that, especially because of all the different kinds of land resource cards they actually have. So tap lands, shock lands, lands that do stuff when they enter the battlefield, stuff like that. But I do think that going forward, not many, if any, card games will succeed if they use the Magic the Gathering format, simply because people are now more used to getting mana in more streamlined ways, and the feeling of getting mana screwed or mana flooded is just so bad from a player perspective. It's not as bad in a physical format, because you can always just chalk up, if you give yourself something that you can blame the game on. That's the thing that players do a lot. They look at a game and they don't always see where they went wrong, they see where the game did them wrong. And I think that removing as much of that as possible to where the game can screw you, will, in your core, in your base mechanics, removing that is really good, because it means that with introduction of new cards and mechanics and stuff, you can still give the good parts of kind of RNG mechanics, but it's not ingrained into your structure to where every game is there's just another layer of disassociation between how good I felt like I played and how much the game let me play. And that's kind of rambly, but I hope that the point kind of got across that even though that system has been successful in the past, I do not believe that system will be as successful moving forward. And the third system, which I have personal experience with, basically my three mana system ideas came from the three games that I've played semi-competitively, so Hearthstone, Magic, Dragon Ball Z. The Dragon Ball Super card game allows you to discard a card from your hand to play it as a mana source. And what this does is it means that, let's say you have a handful of mostly expensive cards, and like obviously you'd want to hold on to your expensive cards because they probably have more impact in the game, but it means that you're able to make a decision each turn on which card in your hand is the least useful and which card you think in your hand is least useful going forward. So it's not just, hey, can I afford to discard this now because, say it's turn 1, it's a 4-cost card, I don't want that. But it's also, hey, this is a 4-cost card, but maybe even though it's expensive and I can't play it yet, I should hold it because it's like important to my strategy or it's just a strong card. I like the fact that through the Dragon Ball discarding mechanic, that gives players an immediate choice every turn. And it also, for like, if you're first getting into the game, you can have some basic rules as to what to discard. I have a handful of 1 mana, 2 mana cards, and then a 5 mana card. I should probably get rid of that 5 mana card. As you get better and better at the game, you're able to identify more with like what your deck's strategy is, what cards are important per matchup, stuff like that, and you're able to make really informed decisions about which cards you currently have are the least useful and being able to use those as a mana base. The problem with this, in the way that Dragon Ball does it, is every card is worth the same. I don't have a ton of experience with Dragon Ball, so there could be cards that I've never seen that take advantage of what I'm about to put forward, but every card that I've played in Dragon Ball or seen played in Dragon Ball is worth 1 mana. Yes, they can be worth colors. Colors is a whole nother mechanic in it, like a subcategory of this mana system that I haven't thought about yet, but at the base level, each card is worth 1 mana. What this does is, how do I want to put this? Each card is completely equal to each other. And while that's good, I think it becomes kind of boring. And once you're able to understand exactly like which cards you don't need as land, like which cards you don't need in your game plan, you can very easily just put it down as a land. What I'm trying to do with mine is to enhance this system to where, let's say you have a very simple card, but it's like a good early game minion, like a 1/1. Let me pop up an image really quick, actually, that can try to help us understand what I'm about to put down. So I'm going to remove the background image really quick and just show you this guy. This was the very first card that I created. It's very simple. It's a 1 mana 1/1 creature. When it's played as a creature, it has a battle cry effect. You gain 1 seed token. We'll talk about that later. Disregard that. But when it's discarded and played as a land, not only can it be spent as a normal land card like it should be because you discarded it for land, but it also has a secondary benefit. So instead of tapping and gaining 1 mana to then spend on your cards, you can instead tap it, gain no mana, but then create another seed token. And I think that giving cards the distinction between, hey, sometimes you can play this as a creature and it'll do something, or it'll just be a body, or hey, if you happen to decide that discarding this as mana is really good for you, then you can also take advantage of this secondary effect. Opens up a ton of possibilities, because you can not only make cards which are decent in either form, which, this guy would be, but you can also make cards that if you play it as say it's a big minion, you play it as a big stated minion, but its on play effect as a creature harms you in some way or takes resources away. But let's say you had this like giant creature, but if you played it as a land, then you got some sort of really massive benefit to make up for the fact that you gave up the chance at having a large creature. I think that opens up a lot of avenues for very simple, like, base idea cards that have a lot of, like, like room to work through. It opens up a lot of design space. That's the word I was looking for. Because you have like almost infinite possibilities. There's tons of ways that you can take a system which gives your land's battle cry and make that very fleshed out and interesting. So in my game that I'm designing, I've taken this approach. I'm going to pop up this idea card again. And essentially, all of your mana can be spent as a creature or all your cards can be played as a creature or discarded as mana. Currently in the game, I am trying to avoid spell cards. Now, this seems kind of weird. There's not a lot of card games that don't have spells. But what I've found is when I try to teach new players card games, creatures are very immediate. You play a guy from your hand, it goes on board, it stays there. Guess what? If it does anything when it enters, it does it. You can use that creature to fight, to kill, to win. Very straightforward. Everyone has a base understanding that if I play something, like if I play a creature, it's a thing that exists. It's very tangible, that feeling that I played this card, now it's on the board. Trying to teach newer players spells, especially more complex spells, is very difficult. And right now in the card game like genre, you have Magic, very complex, very, very old, super finicky with lots of interactions, not accessible. You have Hearthstone, pretty accessible, digital card game, really good. And aside from that, every card game I've seen that tries to come out tries to have something very big that separates them from the competition. So things that come to mind is Shadowverse with the adapt mechanic or the evolve mechanic, whatever they call it, where you play your card as a basic card and then you have a certain amount of these energy points for the entire match, and if you mistime your energy points to upgrade your card, then you just threw away the entire match. That's very difficult for a new player to really get a grasp on. And I think that by trying to make a card game very accessible at the base and then adding complexity later on through, expansion cards or whatever is a much better way to go about it. The only issue that I see with this going forward is that, at some point in development, maybe it comes to the fact that, hey, we probably should add spells. There needs to be kind of more instantaneous effects. I'm trying to avoid that. I can totally see a world where it comes up where this entire idea of there's no spells has to be scrapped. But I do think that it's an interesting, constraint to put upon myself as a designer to try to make a game that feels both interactive and fun while having less instantaneous elements, because creatures are very permanent. Spells are inherently very instant. You play them, they do something, they go away. But typically, let's take something like Frostbolt in Hearthstone. You play spell, you target something, other thing dies, 1-for-1 trade. That's really cool. And that instant feeling of I played something, it did something is really important. But I think that concept can be taken and added to creatures instead. So while this distinction may not sound like it's a big deal, when teaching newer players a game, it's very important that you're able to set out very easy to follow steps in how a game plays out. You start the game, you discard a card for mana, you then play a creature, and then your creature can do things. Is a lot easier than saying you start the game, you discard a card, you play a creature, blah blah blah, a couple turns later, and then your turn becomes you can discard a card for mana. If you want, you can play a creature, you can maybe play a spell. You also have to play around the fact that your opponent might have spells. You also have to consider if you play something and then it gets killed, is like, how does that affect your decision making? And I think that by making a game with only creatures, you're also able to like kind of artificially speed up the game. Now, that might not seem like an issue, but your average Hearthstone game takes, 6, 8, 10 minutes. And while that's fairly digestible, there's games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you can win on turn one. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the only card game that I've seen that on mobile you're able to play a game in like 5 minutes and sit down and be like, okay, cool. I had a 5-minute break. I was able to play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm out. Trying to get a card game down to its base, like very basics, so that you're able to make something super accessible and very easy to sit down, play one match, go away, is definitely something that seems very beneficial in the market today. As mobile games are becoming very popular. People are really busy, it turns out, nowadays. So trying to sit down and play like a 20-minute game of Magic can be really hard for a lot of people, especially if your economy in your game is based around like daily wins or daily games. It's really hard for people to be able to complete everything and not feel like they are forced into sitting down and playing every day. Because you need to strike a balance between, hey, I can play whenever I want and get some rewards, and obviously as a game designer, I want you to be playing my game as much as possible. So you have to strike a balance between, it feels like I need to be playing, otherwise I'm missing out, and it feels good to come and get rewards. And that scale is really difficult. If it was easy, then one of the massive games would already have, kind of perfected it. But no one really has yet. So I think that by making your games shorter, easier to access, and just quicker to get through can lead to a lot of really good opportunities for your game. So that's kind of my basic idea for the mana system, and trying to remove spells without removing, like, obviously the effects of spells. So like you can have minions that come down and deal damage, and guess what? It's kind of like you casted a Frostbolt, except you got a little guy with it, so it feels more permanent. And I think that going back and forth with the board state is really interesting, especially for newer players. Because while it seems like there's a lot going on, when you see a board state very rapidly changing every turn, if you're able to hit the right design that you're going for, it'll feel very intuitive that, hey, I played X card, it did X to kill Y, Y is now dead. On their turn, since I just did something fairly powerful, I can expect they're going to do something fairly powerful back to me. And I think that is going to be very... I think that's just going to feel good as a player. Because I know a lot of people that I've tried to get into card games. If you try to play a card game with them, by like turn 3, they're pretty bored. Because it turns out in most games, you kind of play like one thing a turn, or maybe your opponent doesn't do anything because they're a more control-y deck. And so by like turn 3, maybe there's no minions played and you've done nothing. Like nothing tangible. Because let's take a Hearthstone example. If I'm teaching somebody Hearthstone, and on turn 1, I play a minion, I show them, hey, it's turn 1, I played an angry chicken. They can look at the game, and without me explaining, they can see, hey, that guy's mana went from 0 to 1, he now has a chicken. And that's very easy to understand and process, that he gained a benefit from spending his mana. In a similar vein, if we're looking at an example on turn 3 and nothing has happened, turn 3, I play Arcane Intellect, and I draw 2 cards. They can still very obviously see from the UI I spent 3 mana, I played a card, and I drew some cards. But it's much more difficult to make a new player understand the benefit of drawing cards rather than the benefit of like playing a minion. So if you're able to get both effects at the same time, by playing a minion, and then also, maybe that minion draws a card when you play it. That's much easier for a new player to understand and be able to get into the game themselves, because it feels like there's less of a barrier there of like the learning curve. Because most games have a certain wall right when you start where you should probably understand basics. And so removing the amount of basics that you have to really comprehend to be able to start like increasing your skill is very important. I think I've kind of beat that point into the ground. I hope that through all that rambling, you're able to understand what I'm trying to say. I'm fully aware, and I'm going to try and fix it a little bit in editing, that this is going to be rambly, but I hope that that key point got through to you. Next thing that I want to talk about is how to frame your game to, like, how do you win, basically. Obviously, you're player 1, you're against player 2. You need to have, like, a life total or a resource that needs to be extinguished for you to win. I decided to just stick with life, because life's easy. And there's a lot of ways to go about how life works. Most games opt for, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to call things the Hearthstone method a lot just because I have a lot of experience with Hearthstone. But like the very traditional, I start with 20 health. You hit me for 2, I take 2 damage, I'm now at 18 health. Try to get me to 0. And that is very simple to understand. But I think it's kind of boring. So, because I'm making a number of sacrifices or a number of design constraints, I don't think I'm sacrificing anything with what I'm doing. I think that I'm just reframing things in different ways that haven't been, tried before. So I don't think I'm sacrificing anything, but I'm not going for a traditional, like, you hit me for 2, I go down to 18, now you try to get me to 0 idea. I'm kind of combining that with the Dragon Ball Z method. So if you're not aware, the Dragon Ball Super method for HP is you start the game with your leader card, and then underneath your leader card you place down 8 cards face down. Every time you take a damage, you draw one of those cards and you lost a life. And if you draw all those cards, you lose the game. So what this does is it means that by taking damage, you're increasing your card advantage, but it raises a weird kind of circumstance where, let's say I have a creature that has 2 attack, and I hit you. The fact that it has 2 attack doesn't actually matter in the scope of your HP. You still only take 1 damage.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Phil here. Wanted to give you a little aside before the next section goes through. In editing, I had a very poorly explained example involving a bunch of 2-1s to explain combat damage and how even if, despite the attack of a minion, you only take 1 health of damage per hit. That 2-1 example is referenced in one of the clips that I kept in. So I just want to give a little bit of a preface to essentially explain that, so when you see it, you kind of know what's going on. The basic idea is every minion, despite what its stats are, will only deal 1 damage to your hero if it hits you, so you only ever take 1 damage at a time. That means if you have a 2-1 with double strike, or a 2-1 with, like, insert keyword here, that 2-1 hits you, you take 1 damage, even though its attack value says 2. The 2-1 with double strike, you would get hit, and then double strike would mean take 2 life points of damage. So you would actually take 2 damage like you would expect from a 2-1. And then 2-1 with insert keyword would hit you, and instead of drawing the card for the damage that you took, you would instead send that card to the graveyard. So when that example pops up, that's what it was referencing. But the original take of that was very, very badly explained. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the video.
The point is, even though your attack says 2, it doesn't actually deal 2 damage. You could have a minion that says, you could have a 9,000 minion
hits you, no keywords, blank text, 9,000, 9,000. You take 1 damage. And I think that combining this system that they take in Dragon Ball with a more traditional blocking method of combat, like Magic the Gathering has, opens up a lot of really cool possibilities. It makes decks which swarm you much, much scarier. Magic the Gathering. Clear board, you have no minions. Let's say you're at 2 life in both scenarios. In Magic, if they swing with 1/1/1, that 1/1's really, really scary. That 1/1 hits you, you go from 2 to 1, you have 1 life total for the rest of the game unless you restore health. And you are on the brink of death. You are as close to death as you can be. And that's, really, that's a scary situation. In our game, you get hit for that 1/1, and you take the 1 damage. You get to draw a card from your, health pool. Because your health pool is not only a resource, it's a resource that helps you generate other resources. And I think that adding layers of complexity to a part of card games, which is very rarely used in such a way, is really good. It's kind of why in Hearthstone, I think that both the best and the worst designed hero power is the Warlock hero power. Because you're able to exchange your life total for resources that other classes are just unable to do. There's no class in the game that has more reliable draw than Warlock does. Because every turn, if you feel safe losing the life, you're able to gain advantage in another way. And I think that by opening that possibility up to every class in your game makes for a really interesting dynamic. The issue is you need to counter that with other mechanics that make it so you don't always want to just go down to 1 health. You don't want your player to be killing themselves or almost killing themselves to get that card advantage. You want to strike a balance between, is it really worth using my HP in this way, or do I need to take another path? And that can be difficult if every minion, no matter its attack value, only takes 1 health. That's where you introduce keywords like I was talking about earlier with the 2/1 examples, like Double Strike. Hey, this minion actually takes 2 of your HP cards away. Or, hey, this minion, when it hits you, you don't get to draw that card anymore. It just goes into the discard pile or whatever. And I think that adding complexity into the HP pool mechanic helps to keep the game still complex and have very important decisions, while we're able to remove kind of the scary, while we're able to simplify things like combat, or the mana system. So in our talk about how there's not going to be any spells, removing that layer of complexity allows us to then put complexity somewhere else, because it's a lot easier to digest that you as a hero, you are a person. You have abilities, you have a certain amount of HP. You can be very powerful. You could say your leader card has strong abilities or whatever. You want to be that. You don't want to be like in Magic, where your character, your portrait in Magic Arena is just a portrait. You don't do anything. I think that giving your player giving your players giving the person that you play as power can go a long way in our genre, because so many games kind of just put you as
I'm this person. I may have one special thing about me. Like in Hearthstone, you change hero powers. Cool. But I want to take that up another notch and really, like, I chose to be Leader X. Leader X has this ability, this ability, this ability, and also I'm strong as fuck. So I want to give oomph to your hero by giving it more complexity rather than giving your cards as much complexity or your, like, deck structure in the way that you have creatures and spells and resource cards and whatever. I want to remove that layer and instead put those resources into something else. To better explain this point, I'm going to pull down this image, and instead I'm going to pop up a little basic leader card. So, you got your leader card. In the bottom, you have, like, your number of starting HP, so how many cards you put down. And in, like, to make you feel powerful to go along with those ability ideas, you could have potentially cards that, like, or abilities where, let's say you have a minion on board, and you want to your hero says you can sacrifice a minion to gain another health point card. That would be kind of this, like, first example. I can't aim. Oh god. Okay, we're gonna do it this way. This one, we add a health point card, but we lose a resource being our creature. Then every hero could have either a passive or an active ability, so that even when you have no resources available, so starting turn 1, you either have text to where, like, maybe every turn, in a very extreme example, maybe every turn, if you're this leader, you draw an extra card. Or maybe every turn you summon a 1/1 or whatever. Obviously, those are very massive things, so they wouldn't probably be that powerful, but that's to kind of get you the idea that every hero is going to have something that they can do every turn, kind of like a hero power, but maybe it doesn't cost mana, it just happens. Or maybe it's a static effect. So, like, in Magic, there's Planeswalker cards that have text at the top before their abilities. So, like, Tamiyo says, spells that your opponent plays cannot make you discard cards or sacrifice creatures. Cool. Maybe your initial leader card that you start with will have an ability like that. And then maybe some have lose HP and get effects or get resources. So that would be like the life tab ability from Warlock. That would be a minus in our game. That'd be lose 1 HP, exile that card. So whatever, you don't actually draw that card, but maybe you draw a different card from your deck or something like that. So that's kind of the idea for leader cards. And I haven't worked out any of the numbers or balance on how much HP you start with, or if it's worth considering giving different heroes different starting amounts of HP. That's all, like, a little bit later on. But that's my basic idea for a leader card. So we just talked about a ton of kind of, like, really abstract concepts. And so I'm going to run through this little list of things I made to talk about in this video, and then I'm just going to show you some cards for the first class, which I've started to create. And in the time from making this video and making these cards, I've wanted to change a couple things, but I haven't, like, made a new card, like a new written out card that I'm going to show you for it. So I'll explain those changes as well. Everything that I say, show, anything like that, very subject to change, and I hope that as I continue to develop the game, that I will make update videos and allow you guys to, you know, understand my insights, so that even if, like, one day my game doesn't become a reality, maybe someone along the line will find these and, you know, be able to take influence from them. So, attacks will do 1 damage to leader unless specified by a keyword. Larger stats is instead used for blocking. So, we've already talked about the leader taking 1 damage at a time thing, but minion stats are still important because I like the fact that in Magic the Gathering, their blocking system means that, like, you can... There's a term called chump blocking in Magic, where let's say I have a 9,000 unit and you have a 1/1, you can block that 1/1, and that 8,999 damage doesn't go anywhere. You successfully traded your creature to not take damage from my creature. And that's really cool. I think that having that basic idea of minion combat, where minions have stats, bigger stats wins typically, and things are able to be removed from the board in that way, is really important and pretty core to a card game that, you know, has combat in it. So I like keeping that system. Many classes can create token or artifact cards that can be exchanged for different resources. This is an idea that I haven't fleshed out very much, but in the cards that I'm going to show you, they all revolve around the druid or dryad class, whatever you want to call it. Their entire thing is nature and healing and staying alive and being like good guys. And they create these things called seed tokens. And I think that it's interesting to think that if you play druid, you get like a druid leader card, so you get their abilities, but then you also get these seed tokens. Is it better to keep this token mechanic confined to one class, or should every class have access to their own specialized token, so that you can say, I'm playing druid, I create seeds. My seeds can be exchanged for other resources. Let's say you take 3 seeds and you gain 3 health. But let's say I'm playing like a demon guy. He creates corpse tokens, and if I get 25 corpse tokens, then I can deal direct damage to you, or something like that. I think that that's a very interesting mechanic to explore. That's a little bit later down the road. I'm trying to create a playset of cards for 2 classes, because then you can very easily like balance test those against each other by actually playing the game. So my first one is druids. I have not created a second one yet, so I'm not sure whether or not I will include this artifact mechanic in all the classes, but I think it's something worth considering, so I wrote it down. Mana will be gained through the Dragon Ball Super method. Already explained how the mana system will work. And then some minions have effects if played as a land. This we've already gone over as well. So I've got my basic idea points out of the way. I've shown you the leader card and explained its little basic stuff. So I'm now just going to show you a couple cards which I created for this druid class to kind of, you know, it was the very beginning, so kind of to kickstart this idea. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is the one I already showed you. This is the Lonely Gatherer. It's a 1-mana 1/1. If you play it as a creature, then it has a battle cry effect of creating 1 seed token. And then if you play it as a land, you're obviously able to tap it to have a land, or to have a mana for that turn. But let's say you don't need all your mana that turn, you can then instead tap it to create another seed token. Before I go forward, I'm going to explain the seed token in its first iteration. This was before I considered adding tokens and adding tokens to every class. And also, the bottom is very obviously imbalanced, but it was just to put out ideas of how they would work. So this is a seed token, and what it is, it's just a one mana thing. It's an artifact, I called it, because Magic the Gathering calls things that go on the side of your board that don't actually really attack normally artifacts. You can combine seed tokens for an extra effect. So 2 mana, 2 seeds, you can, you know, destroy those and in exchange get a 1/1 plantling creature on your board. Or for 4, maybe you could draw a card, and for 10, maybe you could gain an extra mana. It's basic stuff like that. But if I'm going to add this token idea to every class, they'd be much more specialized. So instead of, you know, just making a minion or drawing a card or gaining very, very basic resource exchange, it could be stuff much more specialized. So like, let's say I said the druid's all about like healing. Let's say maybe you take 6 seed tokens and you gain, you know, 12 health or something like that. Or, you know, you take 2 seed tokens and you can heal a minion or stuff like that. I have not ironed out combat yet as to whether or not it will function like Magic does, where all your minions heal at the end of your turn, or whether it will take like the Hearthstone way, where damage is pertained through turns. But that'll be something to choose, and that will obviously impact the what these seed tokens could do theoretically. But so I'm going to minimize this guy a little and put him up here so that he's there for reference while we go over some other cards. Let's start with the Stump. So this was the second card I made. You can kind of tell which cards went in what order because I went 1, 2. I made them like 1, 2, 3, 4 mana costs just as like a little curve. 2 mana Decaying Stump. It says 0/6 and it cannot gain any +1/+1 counters. I said stat buff encounters because I'm not sure, we've had no playtesting balance, anything like that. So I'm not sure if maybe giving it more health is also too overpowered, but starts as a 2 mana 0/6. At the end of your turn, Decaying Stump loses 2 health and creates 1 seed token. So the basic idea to get from this without worrying about any balance is you have a minion that does nothing except potentially block that just helps generate the specific resource for your class. So I think that's a very basic card that some sort of iteration of will definitely end up in the starting Druid deck. And then I have just one more card for you. The Dispersing Helper. It's a 4 mana 2/1 with flying. I do believe that I'm going to be using like normal units are grounded, so they can only block and attack ground units. Flying, they can fly above stuff, so they can't get blocked by ground units, stuff like that. Potentially considering, depending on how classes work out and flavor and stuff like that, maybe having something that's below ground, so you have to have like super defenses for it, stuff like that. But so this is a 4 mana 2/1 flying, and when it's played as a creature, you can transform X number of seed tokens into 1/1 invasive plantlings that create a seed token when they deal damage to a leader. I didn't take a picture of the seed invasive plantling token, but it's a 1/1, and when it deals damage to the enemy leader, you can then create another seed token. So that's I made this card mostly out of flavor because I like the fact that this little bird goes around, picks up seeds, puts them where they're not really supposed to, and then they can take over like a very invasive plant species. And so you're able to take these seeds that you've gathered the entire game and then just swarm your opponent out of nowhere with a Dispersing Helper. I do think that currently the Druid is focused on like healing and like big tempo turns, kind of like Selesnya in Magic the Gathering. So that was kind of the basis for a card like this. But I think it brings up another interesting way to use the seed tokens in a way that isn't written on the actual seed token card itself. Because obviously the point of this is you get the seeds and then you exchange them for another resource. So in the prototype example above, you can draw a card, you can make a minion, you can gain mana. This one gives your seed tokens another layer of something they can do for you, which I think is a very obvious step for cards to go if this artifact and token idea remains in the game. So yeah, that's really all I have down so far, but I'm really excited about the potential for creating my own game, and I'm really happy to spread give ideas to anyone out there who is also trying to create their own game. So I hope that this is a useful resource and you had maybe it got you thinking about some stuff, and if I didn't, well, at least I have this for me now, so I won't forget my ideas. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. If you guys have any questions or ideas regarding my game, feel free to comment in the comment box. And if you want to join the Discord, you can always get in contact with me through that. And yeah, so thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.